LaxFactor podcast.
What is up, college lacrosse fans? This is the 54th episode of the LaxFactor Lacrosse podcast. Today is going to be a bit different. Instead of listening to me ramble, which I know you all look forward to so much, you're going to get to listen to me talk to Paul Carcaterra. I did a phone interview with PCarc on Tuesday. He was gracious enough to slum it and come talk to a peasant like myself. So we're going to talk about culture shock and what it's like coming from downstate and playing lacrosse in upstate New York with a bunch of rednecks like the Powells. We'll talk about a bunch of college lacrosse stuff. We'll pick on his better thirds, Anish and Quint Kesnick, as part of the greatest broadcasting team that has ever lived in the sport of lacrosse, maybe forever. So I can't thank him enough for taking the time to chat with me. It's about 35 minutes. I'll include a couple of video clips of ReLAXin with PCarc as we talk about that as part of the discussion, but enjoy it. As always, be sure to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, share with your friends on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, wherever you can share this video. And if you want to get some swag, go to LaxFactor.com. But I digress. Let's get into my conversation with Mr. Paul Carcaterra, PCarc himself. So one thing that I've been dying to ask you and other guys that aren't from the upstate area specifically is you're a Yorktown guy. So I did an interview, my first podcast, and it was terrible because I was terrible with Joe Yavoli, who I'm sure you know. And one of the things that he had said, he was talking to a couple of guys actually over time have said that it's odd and that when they come from their areas where they just assume everybody's the same and they get to upstate New York, they realize, holy crap, upstate New York guys are strange. I've heard strange, weird, a different breed, rednecks. Rob Pinnell specifically was one of the people that you've only had talked to. So in your experience, you played with both Powell brothers, who I know to have a little bit of redneck and upstate New York strangeness in them. So what was that like coming from Yorktown, heading up to upstate New York and playing with a bunch of us goons from up here?
Well, I kind of fit in both categories because the Long Island guys always think of Yorktown as upstate. We're in Westchester County, 45 miles north of New York City. So Long Island people consider us upstate folks. And then real upstate New York people from central New York, or whether it's Carthage and Watertown and that area where the Powells are from, they consider us downstate. But we're certainly downstate because what we had all those years at Syracuse, Coach Simmons used to do an upstate downstate scrimmage. So anyone who's downstate New York would play together. Those the Long Island and Westchester guys, and then as upstate was certainly obviously the central New York folks and western New York, the Rochester kids. And basically those scrimmages were held on practice grounds. It was a great type of atmosphere too, because you took pride in where you were from. So it was upstate against the world, they actually called it. But I was on the world team, and that was considered downstate also. So look, I always think of upstate people as the salt of the earth. I mean, they're very inviting. They're easygoing people. They're wonderful to be around. A lot of times you gather around food. I love food. Food in Syracuse, New York, I think is highly underrated. There's a lot of great restaurants up there and great food. The tailgates that we had all my years at Syracuse were wonderful. I used to rip on Casey. I lived with him for a few years and would make fun of him that he, grew up in a town with one or two stoplights and nothing going on up there. But the family atmosphere and the communal overall vibe that those people from upstate have, it's fascinating. And I love it. I'm going up there in a couple of weeks to call a college football game. I'll make sure that I get in there early so I can spend some time with the current team and watch them practice. And I just love being up there. I have my few go-to restaurants, and I just love it.
What are your go-to eateries?
I love this Italian place in Liverpool called Sant'Angelo's. I don't know if you've ever been, but the Utica greens there are amazing. I love that place. I hit it every single time I'm there. Have you ever been to a place called Coleman's? Oh yes, of course. Isn't that on the north side, or where's that?
It's up on the hill in like Tipperary Hill.
Yeah, near West Jenny, right? Near West Jenny, kind of. Yeah. Yep. I've been to Coleman's.
I forget that they have that famous dish. It's like some kind of roast beef dish with blue cheese smothered all over the top of it. It's damn
Look, I'm
delicious.
a foodie, man. I love food. I'm my father's son, and he's the same way. So once the current meal is over, I'm thinking what I'm eating next, man. I love food, and one of the perks of what I do in travel is I try to find interesting places and get after it.
There's no shortage of that, especially in all the cities that you get to hit. So, stupid question. And
there's never
regarding
a stupid question. Never a stupid question.
This may be.
I was told that as a young kid, though. I was told as a young kid. I asked a lot of questions when I was a kid, and the smart older people would always say, "There's no such thing as a stupid question." So.
My entire family told me that they were stupid questions all the time, and now I have a son who's inherited my nonstop yapping, and he does the same thing. I can just see him doing the same things that I've done when I was a kid, and I encourage his annoying questions that he bombards me with nonstop while watching movies. So ReLAXin with PCarc. I've watched that for a while now since you've been doing it, and how do you end up coming up with the idea, A, to just ride around with cars with kids and shoot the shit, but B, how do you end up convincing a college kid in the prime of his life to let you put your hands on his hair? Like, how does it come to be that you're now cutting kids' hair and interviewing them? Because that was just funny, and it was just a different way to see that whole interview. So whose idea is that? How does that develop?
My idea, I started doing the ride-alongs just because I felt it would be a cool way to get a college lacrosse player or a coach in the same place as I was. And, just there's more of a natural conversation when you're driving around and you're asking them to bring you to certain places on campus. And the formal one-on-one interview with all the lights and sitting across from the subject can be a little intimidating for some of these college lacrosse athletes who don't really deal with the media on a higher level, at least from like a repetition standpoint. So like I came up with that idea just because I wanted to have a more of a relaxed vibe, hence ReLAXin, and just get to know the person and be very conversational with them. As time progressed, I did that for a couple of years. I started seeing more and more of these ride-alongs, and they're great content. But for me, I've always wanted to be unique and different, and I've always felt like it's important to tell stories in sports. It's something that I love doing, whether I'm covering college lacrosse or college football. I want to tell stories. So the hair cutting was kind of a natural progression. I started cutting hair when I was like fifth grade. I grew up in Yorktown, New York, blue-collar town. People weren't too fussy about getting their hair cut. I really started learning how to do it. I watched all the barbers who used to cut my hair in regards to what they would do. I kind of just self-taught myself when I was really young. When I was in college, I used to cut all the guys' hair, a lot of my teammates, my friends. I cut my son's hair every single time. He never goes to a barber. I cut my siblings when they're around. Obviously, as we've gotten older and we have our own lives, it's hard. I cut my dentist's hair in town. And, my dentist has a great practice in Ridgefield, Connecticut. He's not going to let some hack cut his hair. I really know what I'm doing. Like, I really know how to cut hair. So I just felt like, this is a great kind of segue to the next version of ReLAXin. And the first couple times I mentioned it to people, they had no clue. And this is before it even went on air. So like, you can a couple of these episodes before they're even live, and you have to convince the people, hey, I'm coming out here. I'm going to cut your hair. And, Brian Holman from Utah was one of the first, the head coach there. Casey Rose, who is a extreme skier, one of the best skiers in the country growing up, is a midfielder, or was a midfielder, just graduated from Rutgers. I know him because I'm an avid snowboarder, and we've met out in Utah and hit the slopes together. He was one of the first people to kind of have a leap of faith. And I explained to him, and I'd known him long enough. I'd known Brian Holman. So like once the first couple pieces came to life and were on air, I mean, everyone's down with it, man. Who doesn't want a free haircut? And also get some exposure for their program. So I've cut Dave Petromala's hair. I've cut Andy Shea's hair. I've cut Kevin Corrigan's hair. These are all, top 10 Division I coaches, and any kid's going to let me cut their hair. So I love doing it. I'm going to do season 2 this coming year, and I think it'll be fun.
And that was going to segue into the next question was, do you already know, and are you allowed to say who you're looking into talking to this upcoming spring?
Sure. Yeah, I've given it some thought. One Cuse guy that I want to get with in one way, shape, or form is Tucker Dordovic. I think he's got a great story. I really like the kid. Have a growing relationship with him. He had a sit out last year. I think he might be the best player on the Syracuse team. Definitely want to get after him. At some point in time, I'd love to cut Bill Tierney's hair if schedules permit. He's just a legendary coach, has the most national championships in Division I lacrosse history with 7. So if I got to Denver, I'd like to do him. I did Grant Ament from Penn State, who was a first-team All-American. Maybe getting another Penn State guy because I think they're going to be really good. I'm bullish on them. They'll probably be preseason number 1.
Mac O'Keefe. I mean, he could use a haircut because, that kid, he's by far the best off ball. And it's weird because he doesn't look like an off ball attackman when you watch tape. But just to see what he does off ball to make Ament's life so easy, it's just, I've never seen a player that's able to just get that open to the point that you're always scratching your head thinking, how the hell did the defense just leave O'Keefe of all people alone? And it's rarely ever them just leaving him alone. It's him sneaking, running off curls, getting sly on the backside.
Yeah, he's great like that. And, they both make their lives easier. I mean, Grant's a righty feeder. He throws about as good of a through pass as anyone I've seen in a long time in college lacrosse. And Mac's a lefty sniper, too. So they play off each other really well. I think going down to Maryland, too, I wouldn't mind cutting Bubba Fairman's hair. I think he's a character, that kid. So I might go after him.
Just the name alone warrants a haircut and a visit. That's another weird thing I was going to ask is since I'm a Syracuse fan and I grew up my whole life a diehard Syracuse fan, I despised Hopkins, Virginia, anybody that ever got in Syracuse's way. So as I started doing this podcast about 2 years ago, now I start to cover and watch all sorts of lacrosse. Last year I watched 100 plus games. And I find myself, as much as I don't want to admit it out loud, enjoying and becoming a fan of Hopkins and Duke and Virginia, heaven forbid Virginia this past season even. So as a broadcaster, how long did it take for you to give up? And maybe this wasn't as big of a deal for you because you got out of the college game and you played some pro and you've been all over the place mingling with the guys that you did battle against. But how long did it take as a broadcaster to stop feeling guilty about becoming fans of teams like Hopkins? Because I'm sure it's unavoidable once you start getting close to these programs and you're just watching them play at a high level all the time.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think for me, when I left Syracuse, I had a little bit different of a scenario. My brother Brian was a goalie at Johns Hopkins. When I was a senior, he was a freshman, so I got to watch him play for the next 3 years. And I went down to almost every single game. I mean, it's my younger brother. So I was rooting for him every single week. So once I left Syracuse in 1998, he was a sophomore. It was his second year starting. He was a first-team All-American and National Goalie of the Year. One of the best goalies in Johns Hopkins history. I think he's second all-time in saves. So I got to watch his last 3 years as a starting goalie. And I went to almost every single weekend game rooting for them because it's my brother. So I think what happened was, obviously, I was still rooting for Syracuse and wanted them to do really well. But I think I was kind of thrown in the fire of kind of understanding that there was other lacrosse outside of Syracuse. And that's not to say I don't root for Syracuse. I always want to see them do great, and I want to see them win national championships. But as time goes on, you want to see the sport grow too. I mean, when Syracuse went to 22 straight Final Fours, I was a part of 4 of them. It was an amazing feat. But for this sport to really grow, I mean, is it really healthy for one team to make 22 straight Final Fours? And that's why you don't see that anymore. And you're not going to, because there's just too many good teams out there. And, Loyola in 2012 was able to win a national title. Denver in 2015. Yale won it in 2018. So you're able to understand that the game is growing. And if you're a fan of the sport, you want to see great lacrosse. And you want to see it in more than just, 5 to 6 to 7 schools. You want, 20 schools to have a chance before the season starts. I mean, Penn State, I think, was preseason number 11. I was always bullish on them, and I tweeted in the beginning of the season in February, I thought they'd make the Final Four because they had so many key ingredients to be successful. But that's not really too far off now. You see these preseason teams that, were under the radar. They were making runs at national championships. So it's good for the sport. I mean, I'll always root for Syracuse. They gave me a chance and gave me an unbelievable opportunity. And I fell in love with the game even more when I got to Syracuse. As much as I loved it as a kid, playing for Coach Simmons was the greatest lacrosse experience of my life. So I'm indebted to the program and I love it. But I'm certainly conscious of the fact that there's so much more lacrosse out there. And if you want the game to grow as a whole, you got to be a fan of the game.
I begrudgingly agree. I agree, but I agree the same way that my son would say that he agrees with me when he knows that he's done something wrong and he doesn't want to admit it, but he has no choice but to admit it. Because I do hate the fact that we haven't got to see Syracuse get back to a Final Four in forever. I think that the last time was 2009 when they lost against Duke, or 2011 or something like that. It was close.
2013. Yeah, 13. That's the only Final Four they've made in the last decade. So they won it in 08 and 09. They were bounced in 10 and 11 and 12, and then they made it to a national championship game in 2013. But that's the only Final Four in the last 10 years, and it is a tough pill to swallow. And as much as there's been parity, I think the standard still should be for Syracuse to make Final Fours. I'm not saying every single year, but they should be making, 1 out of 3 or 1 out of 4. I mean, Maryland went to 7 straight. Duke went 7 of 10. There's no reason Syracuse shouldn't be there more than they are. I mean, that's just my feeling. I mean, they have a huge budget. I think it's been reported that they spend more on college lacrosse than any school in the country. At least a couple of years ago they did. So the expectations are there, and the fans should have those feelings that they're upset when they're not there, or they're there once in 10 years. I mean, the standard is higher than that.
And I agree. And for the crowd that's called for Desco's head, especially the last 3 or 4 years, I've always said, but hold up. Yes, we haven't got back to the Final Four, but during the regular season, they've to a degree have had that similar dominance through the regular season, both in the ACC play, since the ACC has been a thing. They were the 1 and the 2 seed, twice respectively over the last 5 years. So it's not like they haven't had ridiculously successful regular seasons. It's just not translated to winning in the playoffs for whatever reason. They just can't get past that second round, which has been painful.
You're 100% correct. I think a lot of it has to do with there's a couple things. I think the recruiting hasn't been as good as it's been, and they just made some changes in the staff, and they hired a guy from the outside, and Pat March, who's known to be a really good recruiter, and I'm hearing some great things early on about him. Recruiting equals players equals depth, and you want that depth in May. And I think another reason is you look at all the championship teams and those teams that made it to the Final Fours. We always had a guy on attack who demanded the ball and had a huge presence in the offense and was like a national leader as well. I mean, you can go from the first national title in 83 to Tim Nelson to the 88, 89, 90 reign. Even though it was the Gates, you still had guys like John Zilberti and Tom Marichek and Greg Burns, who were all first-team All-Americans, meaning one of the top 3 players at the position in the sport. And then you go to 93 championship, you had Matt Ryder. In 95, you had Casey Powell. In 2000, you had Ryan Powell. 2002 and 4, you had Mikey Powell. 08 and 09, you had Mike Lavelle and Kenny Nin. So there was always that marquee, and the common denominator are all these guys. They were all first-team All-Americans. And when you have a first-team All-American, one of the best players at his position in the sport, a top 3 player at that position, you demand notoriety, you demand the ball, you demand respect within your locker room and against your opponents. And it's just that vibe of knowing you have that guy. And to be honest with you, since 2015, when Kevin Rice graduated and he made it to the Final Four as a sophomore, really haven't had that marquee attackman, the guy that just changes everything.
That and that's what I've said, and that actually perfectly leads me into my next question. As a fan, most of the fans are pretty excited this year about having a number 22 back on the field, and we were all fairly upset at not having a 22 on the field. So you played with 2 famous 22s, albeit Casey was the only one that wore it while you were in school, and Ryan picked it up after you guys graduated. So even like as an alum, do you guys give a crap about the 22 being back on the field? And even more, a kid that has Scanlon, he's the first kid that has a chance at being a 4-time All-American, and now he'll get to wear number 22 hopefully here these next 3 years. So does that actually warm your guys' heart to see a guy as high profile as him that's really has a really good chance of being a 4-time All-American, wearing that number and kind of bringing it back to its glory, and possibly being, like you said, the guy on the field? I watched him play this weekend and he looked good, as did Dordovic, but what's it mean to the alum to have 22 back?
Yeah, I don't want to speak for everyone else, but for me, I don't really care. I mean, I think the expectations and the pressure that number has given. I look at what, Jordan Evans. I mean, that poor kid was a nice player. He wasn't one of the top players in the country. I mean, he did come in as a monster recruit, but he had to listen to that 22 noise for 4 years, and unfair expectations. Yeah, he asked for the number, or he was cool with getting it. So you could argue it takes two to tango, but I don't know. I'm not really feeling it with the number, to be honest with you. I don't think it's that big of a deal. My personal preference would be to give it to the proven best player on the team every year. If it's a junior or senior, a guy that can handle it, a guy who's had success, a guy that is not going to wilt if he's given that number. I don't really love giving it to freshmen, especially in today's day and age with social media and and all the noise that it creates. I just think it's kind of crazy. Just let the kids play. I mean, Scanlon wanted the number. Chase Scanlon's a really good player, but he's different than a lot of these other guys. I mean, he's a phenomenal step down shooter. If the expectation for Chase Scanlon is to dominate one-on-one matchups against the best defenders in the country, I don't think that's realistic. I think he's a great step down shooter. I don't think he's the best dodger on the team. I think Curry and I think Dordovic both dodge better than him and create their own offense. I think Chase Scanlon's, like I said, a great shooter. But if the expectations are for him to grab the bull by the horns and run the offense day one at Syracuse, I think people are going to be in for some disappointment. And I don't say that like that his game is dialed in. It's just the way that he plays. Like when I think of a 22, I think of like, give me the ball in overtime. Everyone get out of my way, right?
Mike Powell style.
This is my team. Mike Powell, Casey Powell, right? Gary Gate. Chase Scanlon's a really good step down shooter and can create off of quick ball movement, but he's not the type of guy that like is going to take it to the best defenders in the country week in and week out. And people that listen to this might say, after the season, hey, he had 40 goals again. You were wrong. No, you can score goals in different ways. I'm just saying that like a big time 22 player is normally a guy who creates all the offense, right? It's not like it's not a 3-point shooter in basketball, right? It's the guy that like dribbles and dominates one-on-one matchups off the dribble, right? And to me, I think like Curry and Dordovic are number one and number two in any order. And I think Scanlon is probably the third option on the team.
Yeah, I would agree. And we got a good look at it this weekend up at Cortland. And they went with Rafis and Cook on the field with him running beside Scanlon. And it's just like you said, he played a lot more off ball and at X than he did ever trying to dodge to the cage. And they primarily had Rafis and Cook dodging to the cage. So it was actually a very good complementary attack unit. It looked like having those guys out there. And I agree, the shooters out top, that first midfield line, because they ran Dordovic, Curry, and Trimboli all together again, and they look deadly. And that's, you're going to find scenarios where you may even see a 22 getting short sticked because, like you said, he's out of those 6 players on the field when that first midfield line's on the field, he's the least accomplished dodger overall. So there were scenarios that's even in the scrimmage.
Point. Yeah, I would agree.
And he ended up with some 100%. Shorties. I have video of the scrimmage this weekend where he had a shorty in the fourth quarter at X and just wrapped him right around and scored. So I think that we will see that. But I am excited just to have the number and a high-profile kid wearing it. Now, we'll jump into something weird that we'll do here. It's a who you got. So picture you're on a playground. You're about, or let's say men's pickup. It's, you just a bunch of guys show up to play some lacrosse, and you got to pick the teams here. So you're faced with these two guys. You've got the first pick. So just off your hip, who do you take in these scenarios? Casey Powell, Ryan Powell.
Casey Powell, easy. Could do
Casey.
more. People don't realize Casey moved to midfield his sophomore year and was the national midfielder of the year.
Yeah, crazy.
So, I'm going to get a guy who could play on the wings. Like he's a chameleon. So that's easy for me. No disrespect to Ryan, but that's easy.
That's why I'm making you do it, though, because it's putting you on the spot. It's going to make weirdness next time you see these guys, hopefully.
I don't care. I could care. I'll say it right to them.
They're not going to hear this, most likely. Casey Powell, Mike Powell.
Ooh, I got to go with Mike Powell. He's the best attackman I've ever seen.
I put him at the best player I've ever seen, with Lyle Thompson a close second. But you can't front on 4 attackmen of the year and 2 Twartons and 4 first-team All-Americans.
Unbelievable.
It's just crazy.
Best attackman I've ever seen, yeah.
Current guys, Brian Costabile or Dox Aiken.
Ooh, that's a good one. You know what? I'm going to go with Costabile. I think he's a little more versatile. I mean, this is a kid who could play on the wings. And, Dox can too. I just think neither of them are great passers. They're very similar in the 6-on-6 set. I mean, they could dominate one-on-one matchups. They have hammers of a shot. It's kind of splitting hairs. I mean, when you ask me questions like this, a lot of times I can pick one guy over the other because the one player has a certain element to his game that might be different. Although stylistically they look different in terms of the way they cradle and they dodge. They do a lot of the same stuff. But I'd probably slightly go with Costabile.
I'd go with Aiken. What I wanted to do was say, no, that's the wrong answer, but that's not even funny. It's that one is literally a throwaway.
Why would you go with Aiken?
To be honest, he looks a little cooler. Like just the way he carries a stick, the way I like the way he plays.
I like him.
And I just kind of like his toot a little bit more. But Costabile's one of the best step-down shooters in the games, has an absolute cannon. So you could go either way. But I like that one because that one was impossible to decide between. Another impossible one.
They're good kids.
Michael Sowers or Grant Ament?
Oof. Can I ask you who my other players are?
There are none. It's just these 2.
There are none.
I was going to throw T in and make you pick out of a couple of them, but I figured that because of all the attention Ament gets, and I feel like the last year, especially, Sowers was kind of forgotten, whereas Sowers is easily one of the best 3 to 5 attackmen in the country in 2019.
Okay, so this is what it comes down to. If you don't have other players around you in terms of a high level, you want Michael Sowers because he can get to the rack he gets to the rack better than any player in college lacrosse. He's lightning quick. And he also is a 50-50 guy where he's totally dual threat. Great passer. Yep. Ament has turned into more of a passer. I mean, if you have great shooters, that's the guy that you want. Ament is a better passer. Sowers is a better dodger. I think Sowers combination-wise might do a little bit more in terms of like hitting both. Not to say Ament can't dodge. But if you had shooters and a crease guy, you want Ament. If you have no one else, you want Sowers. That kid, what he's done at Princeton, he owns the scoring record, and he's got a full another year. He owns it already. And it didn't even take him that long into his junior season. He's incredible. It's a shame that, the country hasn't seen him on a big stage because he's one of the great talents. I think Michael Sowers and this group, this 2020 group is phenomenal. You look at the guys going out to play professional lacrosse. This is the year you want a lot of draft picks.
It'll be interesting to see how many of these guys and like how the draft goes, where Ament goes compared to Sowers and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I think, I would go with Ament based on, in the PLL. I know the Archers have the first pick, and the reason being is I think Ament complements Will Manny and Marcus Holman really, really well because Marcus Holman's a righty wing shooter and Manny's a lefty wing shooter, and Ament throws that through pass as well as anyone.
Yep. All right, now we'll move away from players. You need a ride to the airport. Anish or Quint?
Good one. depends what kind of mood Quint's in, so I'm going to be safe and just go with Anish.
You're stranded on an island and you're stuck with one of them for an extended period of time, Anish or Quint.
If I'm stranded on an island, I'd probably take them both on a boat and throw them overboard.
Throw them both?
Well, okay, that's a good question. I would take Quint there, and I'll tell you why. Anish doesn't even know how to swim, so if anything bad happened, we'd be in bad shape. And Quint is way more of like a resourceful outdoors person. So in a car ride, I'm taking Anish. On an island, I'm taking Quint because I'd have a better chance of surviving. And he's much tougher than Anish. So if we got attacked by some leopard or something like that, he'd go down swinging.
Quint's a lot more spry. And the last one, You need to bury a dead body, Anish or Quint?
Oh, definitely Anish because he's from New Jersey. So
it's possible he's done that before.
Yeah, but he's actually he's sly. He's got two phones. So that tells you all you need to know. Like why do humans have two phones?
One of them is definitely a burner.
Yeah, he's got a burner, exactly.
And I'll wrap this up here for you. Two more questions. First, dark horse teams. Like last year, Virginia and Cornell were two of my dark horse teams because, when you looked at their rosters, you could say, either of these teams could be good enough to make noise, get themselves to a Final Four and do something. But the chances at the beginning of the season that Virginia was going to be that team, there wasn't a whole lot of people that were picking them to win the national championship. So this year, who do you think that team that's kind of on the cusp that people aren't necessarily going to think is a favorite, but that has, in your mind, as legit a shot as anybody to make it to Final Four weekend?
Well, I'll go one layer back, and I'm not necessarily going to say this is like a Final Four worthy team, but I think High Point breaks through a little bit this year, and I wouldn't be shocked if they maybe even got out of the first round of the playoffs. I mean, last year they had two huge wins against Duke and Virginia in the regular season. They were disappointed by not winning their conference, so they didn't get into the NCAA tournament. They won 13 games. They have a ton of their scorers back. Asher Nolting's one of the better attackmen in the country. I think that's a team that could be dangerous. The other team that I think could be dangerous, and this is outside of the obvious, is Cornell. I think Jeff Keith's going to rebound this year. I think he's going to have a monster season, and I really like the Chase Erlin kid in goal. I think that he's really, really mature. He's tough. He's big. I like goalies like that, man. I think mentally he's got it. Those would be two teams kind of that no one would really think. I think Cornell obviously would probably have a better chance than say a High Point, but I think you need to watch out for a High Point. Cornell is going to be dangerous. And the other team that I think the expectations should be no less than Final Four is Syracuse. If Syracuse doesn't make a Final Four this year, it's going to be a major disappointment. They have the horses. They have the deepest midfield in the country, proven goalie, shutdown defender in Mellon. Like you said, watching that attack, they all kind of complement each other. If you're a Syracuse fan, you should fully expect the team to make it to a Final Four this year.
I do. And with that attack too, I mean, you could almost call them a little unproven defensively. They didn't lose a whole lot, not anything that you couldn't replace. So I agree. Syracuse, it will break my heart if they don't make it back. And then who would your favorite be? Like, obviously this is going to be a kind of a no-brainer. You got the Penn States and the Yales of the world, but if you just had to pick, like, today, this team is definitely going to be there and they're my favorite to win the whole thing. Who would that team be for you?
Penn State. I think Penn State was a program prior to last year never won a playoff game in the history of their school. I mean, that's crazy, right?
It was bonkers.
Never won a playoff game. So everything was kind of a first for them. As much talent as they had and as much success as they had, it was uncharted territory. Highest scoring team in the country. They're all back. I think 9 of their top 10 scorers are back. The one guy they lost was Nick Spillane, and they get a kid, Kevin Hill, who's injured, who's as good as Nick Spillane, who redshirted last year. So, I mean, that's a wash, and add another year of experience. That whole group of 9 or 10 guys is better, right? So you have the best passer in the country. You have the best shooter in the country. You have a 4-year starter in goal. If they could figure out faceoffs in big games, and Gerard Orseri statistically has had a really good career. Just against top faceoff guys, he struggled sometimes.
Yep.
I just think their experience of getting to the Final Four a year ago, and tasting it, but also being disappointed, I think Penn State should win it all.
And TD Ierlan is just their kryptonite. Like, especially I think this upcoming season too, because the only place where they've lost anybody of note really is on the defensive side of the ball. So if they can't win faceoffs against teams like Yale or against other, top tier faceoff men, that maybe it looks a little bit differently. And I had actually picked Knies as my goalie of the year last year, thinking that coming out as a junior that he was going to tear it up because he had a really good sophomore year. So I feel like he would almost feel, I don't know if it was that he had a down year or it was just kind of the way it rolled. When you have a high flying offense like that, it tends to put a little bit of strain on your defense as well.
Yeah, it does for sure. Yeah. You gotta be willing to kind of look the other way. If you're a coach, if you want to play that style and, take that many shots and shoot that much and score, it's going to put extra pressure on your defense. But I'm a believer in that kid. I think, last year was crazy, man. They go down 12-1 with TD Ierlan, just like ripping through and mowing those guys on faceoffs, and then didn't they make it to like 12-9 at half or something? It was 10-1, and then at half it was 12-9.
Yep, I thought it was done, and they did battle back. They battled back as much as you could have expected them to, especially as dejected as they had to be after that start for them to come back was surprising.
Yes.
And my final question, I swear to you this time, when Dino Babers violated Quint with the Syracuse hat, I've heard you guys talk about it, but I've never heard officially. Did he know what he was doing to Quint in that moment when he put that hat on him, or was that just the right place at the right time, or from Quint's perspective, wrong place at the wrong time? Or are you not sure?
Both. Like, I'm not positive, but I'd venture to say, like, when you're in these production meetings and you spend a couple of days with the programs, down at their practices and stuff, a lot of times that stuff's leaked. Look, some Hopkins people were like upset. What's Quint supposed to do in that spot? Like, that's like if Petro gave me a Hopkins hat and put it on my head. Big deal.
Yep.
Like, a lot of people went nuts over it, and it was the moment too. It's a big moment for Cuse winning that game, obviously in the bowl, and I think he handled it. I think he handled it perfectly. His Hopkins alumni friends weren't thrilled, I'll tell you that much.
Right, but I agree with you. What the hell were you going to do in that moment? I thought he handled it perfectly.
Don't put that hat on me.
and the lacrosse world, nobody in the football world had any idea why we were all laughing our asses off at the end of that game, because that was a classic moment.
Living a little cocoon, right? The lacrosse cocoon.
And that's it. That is the interview. If you enjoyed this, please share it with your friends. Like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. If you want to get some LaxFactor swag or just t-shirts in general, go to LaxFactor.com. And you can also listen to the audio version of this podcast by following the link to the blog post that accompanies this podcast on our website. And you can find the audio version there. As always, thank you for listening. Enjoy.